afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast, another State of the Balance video. In fact, this is the last State of the Balance for this year, 2014. We've had quite a bunch of those throughout these last many months, looking at different things as the meta game changed, as new things came in, came out, and so on. And we've largely watched, some trends. For example, there's still, there's a slight. One of the bigger trends has basically been, in the Soviets versus Wehrmacht matchup, things have gone less from, just being all about late game calling to sort of being more, about the mid game where the sort of medium armor arrives, tank destroyers active now begin arriving for the Soviets. That is, in terms of Soviet versus Wehrmacht, things are getting a lot more interesting. There's still some people sort of stick to the old, let's just call in the big tanks and let everything else sort itself out. But, as people are beginning to sort of try and deal with that, things are widening up, things are getting more interesting, we're getting more interesting battles between the two sides, and overall armor engagements all get more interesting. I mean, we've seen Panthers now, Sturmpanzers, Panzerwerfers, Panzervorstugs, Ostwinds, Su-35s, Su-76s, Katyushas, all of that. I mean, it's not just IS-2s, T-45s and Tigers all day long, though they still appear. It is, at least in that particular matchup, notably less happening. Even the T-70, of course, has seen a bit of a resurrection or resurgence there. So in that regard, everything's looking pretty neat. If we then sort of look versus, these sort of newer factions, there are some slight problems. In particular, again, the Oberkommando West really is basically the problem child currently in terms of things. It's stale, repetitive, boring, spammy, blobby, gimmicky, abusive. I mean, you name it. The Oberkommando West is that all except fun, interesting, or not depressing at the moment. I mean, rarely you'll see something interesting, but most of the time it's just hordes of infantry. I mean, for a German army that was sort of, late war, time in the Ardennes, it rather feels like, it's a false Soviet army. I mean, you usually see more infantry from them than the Soviets. And just, as reckless human wave tactics there, so I mean, really, the Oberkommando West desperately needs an overhaul. That's really all I want for Christmas and the next year, really. Just fix the bloody Oberkommando West, overhaul it, make it work. Instead of being about fuel and munitions shortages, be about manpower shortages. Remove some of all those ridiculous high-tier veterancy bonuses for the infantry so they don't become, not needing for cover. I mean, that's a bit the problem, for example, with Volksgunners. They're terrible infantry initially, but once they hit veterancy, they become super soldiers, which really is an absolutely terrible things of doing it. You shouldn't need to go from being absolutely terrible to being too good. That's just messed up. So overall, the Volksgunners need a depot. Again, a lot of units do. I mean, the Oberkommando West is basically just a sick army dragging along, but with no real options beyond the boring. I mean, then compared to the US, things have slightly fallen in there. I mean, versus the Oberkommando West, again, there's a bit lighter. Versus the Wehrmacht, things have taken a bit of an ugly trend lately. I mean, they have plenty of options. The problem is the US can usually pile up on the Wehrmacht early on pretty successfully, and that's a bit the problem there at the moment. The Wehrmacht generally tends to struggle there. I mean, and in part that will probably also be one of the units which we rarely see in larger numbers from the Wehrmacht, the MG42. I mean, it's earlier, here's the problem. Is in part, again, I would say the MG42 needs something extra. It's too cumbersome and doesn't really do enough. I mean, it's supposed to be the best machine gun there, but, one of the most advanced, but overall it performs less than a Maxim or 50 caliber. And of course the 50 caliber does fire bigger bullets, but, that thing's also notably more nimble than the MG42. I mean, something's there not adding up. And I don't really think the Grenadiers need more. Mortars neither, snipers, I don't know, I think snipers could do with that sort of on a conceptual overall, but again, it looks like the MG42 and Panzer Grenadiers need something versus the Americans. Well, I mean, it's too easy, I think, for the Americans to basically overwhelm, and in particular in some maps, they can easily sort of block down several routes by simply occupying a building, and the Wehrmacht can do little. So in that regard, something is needed. And it might also be needed as American taking up gets a bit leashed in. I mean, the speed which they can reach an M20 is notably fast, and it does rather place some heavy pressure upon the Wehrmacht as well. So in terms of that versus the Wehrmacht versus US, there are changes needed, and overall I would suggest some buffs to units who maybe don't see as much uses, like the MG42. Maybe the Wehrmacht half-track could do with a bit of, extra touching up. In some regard, maybe more armor, or maybe some slight suppression to its machine gun. I mean, that's really where I think the problem currently lies. It's too easy to basically sort of, pen in the Wehrmacht as the US, which overall causes well, larger problems, if you will. So that would rather be my thoughts in that department. But I mean, overall, the US still has a lot of choices there, so it's not really there. Maybe the BAR, by the way, could do with a nerf. I mean, I don't really think that needed a buff in the first place. Maybe just make it a bit cheaper once you nerf it. Same with the bazooka. But overall, the US basically still has a lot of tactics, a lot of strategies. They can easily call on a Jackson deal with the most armor. I mean, I've been caught wrong-footed by a Panther, and my Jackson still pulled that one through. So it's not exactly like there's a problem there. I mean, some players like to say, you know, the US needs heavy armor, but I don't really see it. They have one of the best tank destroyers, which is mobile, has got good damage, good penetration. Eventually, one the penetration becomes better. I mean, I think a heavy tank would just result in something like the Soviets and just basic laziness at the moment. So I don't really think that's needed. But beyond that, there's not really much there to critique. And again, with the Soviets, all seems, well, pretty well. They got plenty of options. I mean, overall, again, I think it's basically coming down to fixing the Oberkommando and doing something about the Wehrmacht early game. Not in the Grenadiers, because, again, I don't think they need buffs. I think it's the MD-42 or maybe something in the Tier 2 of the Wehrmacht that needs some slight touching up upon. I mean, otherwise, things looking right. But again, the big bad thing, again, is the Oberkommando West without a shred of doubt, which of course is quite tragic. Although there's one thing with the Wehrmacht that does need a nerf. That's something I've been noticing lately, and that probably also in part due to how the Wehrmacht currently plays versus the US, but it's the Sturmgeschütz E. So many Wehrmacht players tend to go for mechanized assault and then just go for the Stug E. And it's too good. Its high rate of fire basically tears through any infantry squad in shock succession. I mean, that's not really good, particularly not at that price level. And it certainly can pretty much wreck any US player caught slightly off guard, which I'd not really describe as remotely fair at all. So in that regard, lower the Stugie's rate of fire. That is needed. Otherwise, I'd probably still stick to a slight suggestion, which is overall increase the CP requirement for a lot of the heavier armor. Basically, just sort of maybe slightly further change things away from the late game calling stuff. But overall, I think that's, well, really it for this, you know, last state of the balance of the year. Again, you know, partly same old, Oberkommando is terrible, US slightly alright, some small tricks needed, Wehrmacht struggling here and there. Again, I'm rather looking again at the MD-42, nerf the Stug E though, maybe buff the Panzer Grenadiers and the half-track just a wee bit in some direction. But beyond that, I'd really not touch the Wehrmacht otherwise too much. Again, it's the early game that has some problems and basically allowing to maintain a decent field presence. And a part of me might suggest, you know, maybe making the MD-42 a bit more useful in buildings, since currently popping one inside there is a bit of a death sentence. But beyond that, I don't really think there's at the moment a lot to touch upon. The metagame again versus Wehrmacht, so it's flowing, changing US Wehrmacht again due to the early weaknesses of the Wehrmacht. It's a bit repetitive at the moment. Oberkommando West, yeah, it's pretty much, you know, spam. Occasionally someone will do something interesting with a flak half-track. That's usually where things get a bit interesting. But beyond that, spam. So it's versus the Oberkommando West again. Not really much differently. Some Serb players will do interesting, some less so. So there's not really much to touch upon there. So now, looking forward to the new year. Hopefully Relic will finally get around to basically saying, alright, the Oberkommando West is a mess that absolutely resembles nothing in the German army, or anything that's actually remotely fun in the game. Let's fix that. Hopefully they'll do that. Hopefully they'll fix up some of the other stuff as well while we're at it. And hopefully next year we'll have an even more fun and better game. So, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching throughout the year, and hope you had some fun, and hopefully you will be joining me for the next year for more Propagandacast, and of course Propagandacast State of the Balance. Cheers!